This one time at Code Camp, I...
Right.
Do you ever have issues crop up in production that you don't see in development? Do you even know how your app is performing in production? Performance, errors, and analytics to figure out where your app is bogging down are important to keep an eye on. You could try one of those error tracking apps, but why not use a tool that does it all? Try Datadog. Datadog tracks performance, collects data on your errors, and provides you with the information you need to improve your user's experience and fix bugs without having to log into the production server and dig through the logs. What if my app spans across multiple servers and services, you ask? Datadog seamlessly collects metrics from every corner of your application, including services like Amazon AWS and systems like Redis. So whether you want a clear view into your application's performance, need to be notified of new errors, or to keep track of your application across various services you use Datadog. If you go to devchat.tv/Datadog and start a free trial, they'll send you a free Datadog t-shirt. Hey everybody, and welcome to another Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Dave Kimura.
Hey, everybody.
Eric Berry.
Hey there.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we're going to tell some developer horror stories. Now, I think, Eric, you recommended this one. I'm guessing you have some colossal one that you want to tell.
Well, actually, one today. So
right.
That's kind of why I thought about this.
So when they hand you your pink slip next week, no, I'm just kidding.
Right, exactly. So, all right, so let me paint you a picture, okay? Eric Berry sitting down at his desk, 7:30 in the morning, pulling the production database down to his local server.
Oh, dear.
Because he needs to run some tests on that, some reports on live data. All of a sudden, he starts his MERT process, which kicks off all of his jobs, and starts sending text messages to hundreds of people that shouldn't have been receiving text messages. Crap! So I'm watching my sidekick just spin up, and it's just cranking. I'm like, what's going on? I look over there. I'm like, uh-oh. So I quickly delete it and like, shh. Hope nobody finds out, although I just announced it on a podcast. My bad. Yeah, good times. I think this is going to be a fun show where we expose how even seasoned developers are also not as everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah, and I think maybe a cool addition to this episode would also be kind of like just take a quick couple of minutes to see how that could have been mitigated or avoided.
Oh, I can tell you exactly how it could have been avoided.
Just don't do that with production
Had I not
data.
commented out about 8 lines of code, it would have been avoided completely.
Yeah.
The way we have it set up is that there is a fail-safe in the system. When I do a pull, there's a fail-safe that you have to override through an environment variable when you run the application locally. You have to override it with an environment variable, which will make it so that it won't truncate these tables. Now, once these tables are truncated, no messages will be sent. Just so you guys understand the context, I work at a company called Scipio, and we do B2C texting. We're a B2C texting platform that allows customer retention through text messaging, MMS, voicemail, that kind of stuff. So when I pulled this data down, I commented out that stuff, not even realizing that if I commented out those and kicked up the server, it would start sending messages. Because what I didn't want to do is truncate those tables because I needed real data to be able to generate these reports that I'm working on. So there is the first article of wisdom that I can share. Don't comment out code until you know why you're commenting out code.
Yeah. So I would also say that if you have something like an email service, because email is also a situation where something like that could happen. Let's say if, for whatever reason, you do need to pull down production code and it has a background job that sends out emails to people, and you want to make sure that you're not going to send that out to everybody. Instead of commenting out code, you could also make sure that your development environments are set up to some kind of mail server or gem like letter opener or mail dev, to where it's actually never going to truly send out to the real world, but it's always going to stay in a sandboxed environment. Amazon SES has a sandbox environment for sending out emails where things would stay only internally, or it would send out to a whitelist of people.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a couple. So this one time at Code Camp, no, so
How many
back in
developers are going to know that joke? How many developers are going to realize that joke?
American Pie's been out for a number of years. I think they get the reference. Hopefully, I did. So surely other people, but no. I had this
sitting here hanging my head because I've never seen that movie.
Oh, come on.
Oh, it's a rite of passage for my generation.
Yeah. So I was in a situation where I needed to store images, and these images were only ever like 5 kilobytes, 6 kilobytes, nothing substantial. And I really didn't want to mess around with a storage on the local computer because, I was going to have multiple web servers. I didn't want to mess around with a external storage because I was lazy at the moment. And keep in mind, this was like 7 years ago. It was way, way long ago. So I just stored it in the database, converted it over to a base64, threw it in the database. All was good. And it was good. And it worked perfectly fine for many, many years until one day I went in there and saw that this one table was 30 gigabytes. And while that's still not even that large, but for a table with only a couple of columns, it was much, much larger than it should have been. And then being able to extract those out and rewrite them, any kind of task to undo this mess would be substantial. And it would be substantially a long-running process because 30 gigabytes is a lot of data to try to parse through and create a new record or whatever for. So I think in hindsight is you don't have to prematurely optimize, but you also don't have to make bad decisions.
So the lesson is don't store globs of binary data in your database.
Yeah, unless if it's actually data. If it's data, that's
Right.
one thing. If it is something that could be stored as a JPEG, then
Right.
stored as a JPEG.
In hindsight, though, you didn't have the same tooling as you have now to be able to make that so clean, and especially with Rails 5.1 or 5.2 with active storage.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Yeah.
Oh.
No, go on, Chuck. It's your turn.
Your turn, Chuck.
I have one word.
Put your hand on the burner, Chuck.
I have one word. Time zones.
Ah, yeah.
And fortunately, this didn't go public, though it did result in, well, maybe I should just back up. So I don't even remember what the feature did, but, we were doing test first development. I was working for a company here in Salt Lake called Public Engines. I think they're still there. If you go to crimereports.com, I did a bunch of the back end work on that. I was working with David Brady at the time, who's a former host on this show. Anyway, I wrote some tests for my feature and went home. And David was working late for like 3 or 4 nights in a row. And so he'd come in, or he'd stay after about 6 o'clock, and my test would start failing. And so he would fix the test so that it would basically blow up and give this big, awesome error message that said, fix your crap. And so I'd come in the morning and I'd run the test, and, he'd commented out the test, but he'd put this in there. So I'd uncomment the test and take out his message, and it would pass. It passed fine. Well, we're UTC -6, and it was doing a date check. And so when at 6 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time, it would turn over to midnight UTC. And since the database was running in UTC and I was doing my date checks in Mountain Time, they would fail from 6 p.m. until midnight. And so we would have on our CI server and everything else, it would show that the tests weren't passing for a good chunk of the day. And yeah, it just turned out that I had to fix that stupid error And I don't even remember what all I did. I think I brought in some like time cop or something and fixed it that way, or set up the time zone in Rails or both. But yeah, it's just interesting that things that you think you write the test and it passes, but you still may be overlooking something that just may change when you're in a different place or a different time, and So yeah, so for a quarter of the world, it probably would have been broken part of the time if it had gone to production.
I tell you what, man, time zones are a pain. They really are.
Yeah.
And, I work in the time and attendance division at Sage, so we develop time and attendance software. So time zones are a constant pain. But, it's just something you have to deal with. And for tests, absolutely feel your pain. It wasn't until we introduced time cop into our specs that we actually got passing tests consistently.
Yep. Well, and those are just funny errors because, so errors that are hard to track down, the hardest ones are the ones that only happen sometimes.
Yeah.
And the worst ones are the ones that are critical errors that only happen sometimes, because it's like, I don't even know what to do to make it break. And in this case, it turned out that, Dave was working late and that's what the issue was. But yeah, he kept sending me messages in the test suite for about a week before I figured out, because I'd just fix it and, it'd pass. And so I'd move on. And yeah, it gets tricky. And I've also had the same kind of thing with like geographical stuff also at the same company.
I think a lot of people hate the whole time zone system, but I don't think people hate it as much as developers hate it. I think we have the truest hatred for time zones.
Justified if you're a developer true hatred. Who works in time and labor management software, you hate it even more.
Oh my God. Yeah, that would be hard. I remember setting up databases where I forgot to set my time zone on the database, and I forgot to set my time zone on the Rails config, and data would just be all over the place. It was a nightmare. So now the very first thing I do is just UTC the crap out of everything.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. UTC and epoch time it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So.
And then you set everything up pointed to the same NTP server so they all stay in sync.
Yep. Yeah, I've ran into that issue before.
So here's a question: Have you guys run into this? And I ran into this the other day. I do contract work for a guy, and he had me kick up. I talked before about this. We have these 10 remote servers that are handling scraping jobs, and I pushed him eventually to Zeit now. Great service. But at the time, I was putting them all on Heroku. So I have got these 10 servers that are $7 each on Heroku. I move them all over to this other service. 3 months later, he says, "Hey, what's his charge?" I'm like, oops. Because I forgot to shut down those servers. I forgot to turn them off. So yeah, it's not necessarily a development issue. It's more of a contract development issue, but it's still a definite me issue. It's my issue, I suppose.
So I don't think I've ever done that with platforms as a service or anything like that, but I have done that with my Netflix account where I thought I had unsubscribed at one point, but then didn't, and never checked my credit card for like 10 months. And then, there was always that $7.99 charge.
So here's a very good notice. Anybody? So you guys use DigitalOcean, right? DigitalOcean, or have you?
I do. Yeah,
I have.
Okay, so DigitalOcean allows you to turn off a server. Now, in my mind, when I turn off a server, I'm not paying.
Oh, I know where you're going with
this. Off, right? 2 months later, I get a bill for $160, and I don't, because it's on autopay. I don't even think about it. Then I see this. I paid $160 to the server that's been off. I'm like, what the heck? It's off. So I log in, and it made it very clear, like, no, you're still paying, buddy. So
yep.
I realized the value of doing backups and killing servers on there, or you're going to end up paying.
Yep.
Yeah, Linode and a lot of the other ones do the same thing.
Yeah.
You got to pay for the space, and they reserve your resources for you. So
lessons learned, costly lessons learned.
So I'll tell you the biggest mistake that I made on a project. This will make some people laugh and some people cry. So my second developer job, after I worked with Nate, who actually works with Eric right now. I was working at this job, and I'd been there for like 2 months, and the team lead left, and so they made me the team lead. And we built this. It was education lead gen, which is there are about 10 million companies here in Utah that do this. And so what they were doing is they were managing affiliate links and things like that, and tracking pixels and all that fun stuff. And they needed a system that would manage all of it on the back end and keep track of where the money was coming from and where it was going, and keep track of all the leads and keep track of all the affiliates and the whole 9 yards, right? And they also wanted it to be able to host multiple landing pages and things like that and collect the data from those. And anyway, so we built the system. We built this huge monorail. And if you're new to Rails, the monorail is basically, it's a large, tightly coupled application where all of your classes are highly dependent on all of your other classes. And so if you change if you change some of the code in Spain, then everybody in San Francisco gets worried about a tsunami. And that's the kind of code we had. And so we went to my boss and I said, look, I keep hearing about this awesome thing called service-oriented architecture. And I want to, we're going to redo it because, the maintenance cost on this is just crazy. And so the first big mistake was asking to do a big rewrite, which was, I've never done a big rewrite that actually, was a good idea. So we go in and we rewrite it and we do everything with this service-oriented architecture. And we talked, as we're sitting here, we just talked about queuing with Kinsey Durham, but, it came out last week, her episode. And it makes sense to pull some of this stuff apart, just to simplify your code and things like that and make sure that the coupling is well thought out and that you're following solid principles. But no, we pulled everything out into a service. So we probably had a dozen services and then like this thin shell website portion of the application. And that just turned into a different kind of nightmare. And so the main mistake, my boss, when I quit, he looked at me and he was just like, we've spent so much money on this app. And I'm like, yeah, and I left for other reasons, but yeah, mainly to do with him. But anyway, it was, at the same time, it's like, look, there are patterns for the way that you build software, and there are reasons why some of these patterns work well in some circumstances and some for others. And if you take any pattern to any extreme, you're eventually going to have pain because it doesn't solve every problem properly. And so it for us, it just became really, really difficult to keep track of where everything was and which services were talking to which other services to get whichever data they needed, and then how much of it do they cache and how much do they not. And if we had just had, sort of monorail, where it was kind of a main core of the app, and then had these services out there that had to do specific things or had specific responsibilities that weren't core to the actual application, we would have been way, way, way better off. But instead, no, Smarty Chuck, he had to say, hey, let's make everything a service, and then we made everything way too small.
Well, so is that like kind of one of those hold my keyboard and watch this kind of things?
Oh man, that is a juggling act that I'd never want to live again. And unfortunately, that's a lot of companies have that mentality, especially those that come from a more enterprise level backing, like Java type. Whenever I hear Java, I think SOA. Mm-hmm. And so I got one for you guys. So here's a cautionary tale of using a technology too soon, right? And I'm sure we've all faced this: the shiny new object. And at the time, the shiny new object actually was Rails. Back in 2009, I worked for a company. I built all of these awesome things as I could in Rails. It was absolutely amazing. And I was so proud of myself. And then I got a much better offer somewhere. I'm like, okay, I got to go. And they realized, like, I built this thing in a technology that nobody can come in and take over. So They brought me back to help them rebuild it in PHP. Now, in hindsight, doing it in Rails at that time was a bad idea, because when you choose a technology, you also got to make sure that you choose a technology that can be that supports the bus factor, right? If your developer gets hit by a bus, what's your risk? And in that case, I didn't get hit by a bus. I just hopped on the bus and left. But there was a high risk for them, and they weren't too happy. So so there's a good lesson. With all these new JavaScript frameworks coming out, beware.
Well, and I think the other thing just to keep in mind with this is that we all have a responsibility to the people we're working for to add value. And if you add value and then leave them with a maintenance nightmare, you're not helping.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah, even on some of the applications that I build and continue to support, a few of them, they are much smaller, so I will always, kind of run Edge on there. The latest Rails, even some of the beta or release candidates, and it's for the most part worked out fine. However, something that's like my bread and butter that's bringing in the revenue, I'm not going to just do a bundle update, which I'm totally guilty of doing and not locking down my gem versions in some apps. And
been there, had that bite me.
Oh yeah,
it can be a nightmare. So having your gem lock, that's good. Your gem file lock, that's good, but that doesn't save you, especially if there are shortcomings in some gems not working well on later versions, or they've deprecated some kind of functionality that you had to have. You want to make sure that in your gem file as well, you're locking things down. Unless if you just like scratching your head on what the heck's going on and why did this break.
Well, what's really fun with that is when you do a bundle update and it updates some dependency like 3 levels down that's supposed to be compatible with another gem, and then you're trying to figure out why the JSON gem just, you're getting blow-ups all the way down to that, and you didn't actually explicitly include it, and it turns out that, there was an incompatibility there that just wasn't documented somewhere.
Yeah.
So how often do you guys fork gems and then make the change? You submit the PR, maybe never gets accepted because it's upgrading the version support. So now your apps out there are sitting and pointing at your version, your GitHub pull or clone of somebody else's repo.
I do that. I do it periodically, but at the same time, I also have a running list that I will watch those gems to see like what they're updating and how often they're updating, and kind of take it on myself to either check to see if my pull request was accepted and then revert back to the original gem. Because in reality, that's almost kind of like, quote, and I hate saying this, it's like free maintenance from other people, but it's probably good not to deviate from it too much. Like if your gem file is like full of your own private repos and stuff, then that's not a good idea. If you're doing that just so, if that gem's ever yanked, that you're not going to lose that functionality in your application, then use a proxy instead. So, there's a lot of services out there that instead of pointing to rubygems.org, you can point to your own proxy, and that will go and fetch the gems from rubygems.org if the gem is not found on your proxy. So there's a lot of good alternatives. Gem in a Box is one of them, where I run my own private Gem in a Box server that will store all of the gems and the gem versions that I'm using. However, if that gem is, in my gem file, or if I do a bundle update and I don't have my gem file locked down with the version, then I'll actually go and hit rubygems.org, pull the files down, and then store them in my Gem in a Box. So next time I deploy a new application or something, it's going to all read off of my Gem in a Box server.
So that's a hosted server?
Yeah, it's a self-hosted.
I've never heard of that before.
It's a cool service. I have to admit, I have almost never done this.
I have to admit, I have never done it. Sounds awesome.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean forking a gem.
Oh, I did that yesterday. I did it last night, actually. There's a gem that the last activity was, I think, 20 or 30 days ago, but it does not support the latest versions of Rails and all that stuff. So I've had to fork it, upgrade it, submit a PR, all that stuff.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll fork it, submit a PR, but if the PR doesn't get accepted, The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that a lot of the apps that I've built, be it for clients or, for myself, a lot of the time, I get it to the point where it works, and then I don't touch it for quite a long time. And so that code just runs on the server indefinitely. So even if I delete the repo that it's pointed at for that library, the odds of it actually being deployed again are pretty low unless they hire somebody to come and update it.
Yeah.
Do you hate wasting hours debugging code every week when you should be working on your app? You should check out our new sponsor, Airbrake.io, a full-stack error monitoring tool that alerts you to errors in your software, then helps you diagnose and fix them. That means no more wasted time searching log files and more time writing and shipping great code. Airbrake supports .NET and all major programming languages. Get set up at getairbrake.com/CB for a free 30-day trial and the chance to win a $500 Amazon gift card at the end of the month. It's a completely free trial and you'll be shocked by how much time it saves you. Again, that's airbrake.com/CB. Again, that's getairbrake.com/CB.
So I guess if there is like one little bug or something, if it's a gem dependency, then you're kind of screwed with having to fork it and stuff. But if there's a class, like there's this one gem group date, and I was having to use it in a scenario on a application, but they happened to name one of the methods the same as a Rails method, and it overrode it. And that caused a huge problem because I was, I scratched my head on this for, a couple of days. And it was so annoying because I was trying to use a method where I said the beginning of the week, but then offset it to a static day of the week. And it wasn't working. And that's because this gem had overwrote that beginning of the week method. And it caused it to, they didn't take into account of having a offset or a different starting day of the week. They just assumed Sunday. So it wasn't working. I'm like, why is this not working? It's right here in the Rails documentation. So I ended up having to fork it and doing that. But I guess in hindsight, I could have just created my own class or module in the lib folder of the Rails app and then kind of overwrote it back to what Rails was doing originally, but hindsight.
Do you ever have you guys ever had to make patches in your Rails app knowing that those patches were coming in a future release?
No.
So it's something that I learned from Nate, who's, my mentor. He had to patch Rails, and it was something that was coming out in 5.2, I believe. I can't remember. But he actually created a patch, applied it, but every time it ran, it said it. If I remember right, he added a comment. So every time it ran, it says, "If you upgrade Rails, upgrade me." And so it was a very in-your-face reminder to make sure that we stay in sync. I thought that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
No, he actually also added that comment to the gem file behind Rails, right after Rails. He's a smart cookie.
Yep.
So one time, that was back in Rails 3 before they had the enum and active record, where I wanted that functionality because I had a really good use case for it, but it wasn't in Rails 3 yet. So I pulled the libraries from Rails 4, pulled it into my own library, and then just used it in Rails 3. So not really the same thing, but I have done something similar to that.
Cool.
But that's not really a horror story. That was a cool story.
Yeah, that's a cool story. But it wasn't my doing. Everything I've shared has been bad, but Nate's the good guy.
So I've screwed myself a few times with migrations and not making sure that they're idempotent, which is really scary. You should always be able to just migrate and then roll back without hopefully any kind of issue, especially on simple things. But one of those like super annoying things is when you run a migration and you had some pretty sloppy code in the migration file doing some weird things, and it fails, and then trying to figure out like at what part did it fail, and then how can you kind of revert it back? Because if you just do a RakeDB rollback, then it's not going to clean it up back to where it was before. So taking snapshots of your database before you run migrations can be a lifesaver.
I've had a similar experience, and usually what got me in trouble with this, I don't do this anymore. I put my data changes into a rake task, but I would have it, basically add a column and then calculate what should be in that column and then move on. And I've had stuff break there. The other thing that I've done though is that I've had the same migration go in, calculate the value of the current thing, and then delete the columns that it calculated from because we weren't going to use those anymore, and had it actually mess up the calculation and then delete the columns that it was calculating from. And so all of a sudden, we don't have any way of knowing what's supposed to be in there. And so, we've had to pivot a couple of times because we didn't have the data, or, we had to pivot for a few customers because the backup didn't have their data. And, not fun.
That's a mess.
So the moral of the story is if you're going to munge data, do any of these calculations and things, make sure you back up your database before you change the data in any kind of automated way. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, don't do data modifications in your migrations. Bad.
And, you could also set up a replica of your database and then do a dump on that replica without having to lock any kind of tables. Or you can do a MySQL dump in a single transaction and not lock tables and stuff like that as well. So there's really no excuse except for laziness or inexperience.
Or both.
Now you know.
I got two words, and I'm going to just say the two words, and I want you guys to share with me the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay? Materialized views.
I don't even know what that means.
Meh?
I don't know what that means.
So,
what do you mean by materialized views?
Okay, so this is kind of synonymous with your architecture decision that you made earlier on. I used to work for a company, and we had a lot of data coming in. It was a social network company that provides analytics and statistics on your social media accounts, allows you to manage that kind of stuff. So I was in charge of I was helping build one of these sub products that they had, which handled all of the intake of these messages across all of these different networks, from Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, that kind of thing. So what we decided to do was use materialized views. Now, a materialized view is a view that self-updates as data changes in the database. So it's like a regular view, but it is, maybe I'm explaining this bad, Dave. Maybe you can help me explain it. Is that accurate to say?
It's basically just creating a fake table that doesn't, I guess, really exist, that just has a query or stored procedure or something that displays, like if you have a table of companies and users, and if you want that view to show all of the companies and all the users and then the company name, then you can kind of create a view that has just that information. And it can be really helpful and kind of simplify the application side of things by not having a bunch of like raw SQL or messy code in there, because you could just reference this view to get the information.
So essentially it's a standing join, I guess.
Yeah, they can get really messy. Like the types of views that we created, they were probably 150 lines long of just raw SQL. And it got so messy. And it got to the point where we had no idea what was updating things when, and so we had to pull back completely. We ended up converting all of those materialized views to stored procedures, and then being very careful on when we called those. We ended up just killing the database because it was constantly triggering when it shouldn't be. So, for example, if the user record gets touched, it would trigger. If this record would get touched, it would trigger. But now we have these jobs that are running with, basically every single time we bring in a single record, it would trigger. Now we're triggering this thing so much that it was killing our server. And we were hosting our database on Amazon, and they're like, dude, your servers are burning up. And that was a pretty big blunder that we made when we were there, and I'll take the majority of the responsibility on that one.
So that reminds me of this horror story that I did, and it's just so horrible because I didn't realize what was going on until a few days later, and it was so bad. So I had this this belongs to, let's say if you have a student and then a student has many classes. So whenever the student was updated, I didn't have any kind of counter caching or anything going on. So the student would then touch all the classes that the courses that the student was a part of to update, any kind of fragment caching and stuff like that. But then whenever a course was updated, it could have been the course name or something, it touched all the users. So I created this exponential, and it was all done in async. So it would kick back to Sidekick, and then in one day there were over 10 million Sidekick jobs processed, and it was just climbing and climbing and climbing. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? It was so bad. So and then tore apart the code because the memory was peaking. Sidekick, it doesn't like to release memory very much. So a lot of quick and small jobs is good, but when you have millions and millions and millions, you're going to start hitting some limitations. So if you're one to learn about recursive patterns, that's one that you don't want to do.
We did something similar, except it was with counter caches, and it was, I don't remember exactly how it worked out, but it was in some way a circular reference. And so even though eventually when it came back around, it didn't have to increment the counter cache or whatever other cache that was there, it was still trying to update that row with the data that was already in it. And so, it started to slow down the bigger we got.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've run into the same issue. Caching is apparently a big problem with development. It's a hard problem to solve. We use extensive caching where I work right now, and it drives me crazy. It drives me absolutely crazy because it's so complicated in my mind, and in Nate's mind, it's crystal clear, right? It's, of course, this is how you do it. But there's now complex cache keys built around different queries and cache keys built around combinations of objects, and so I understand the value, but I would recommend don't cache too early. Don't make caching a part of your initial story, because when you run into cache errors, there's been tons of times where we run into problems that we don't understand what's going on, ended up being because it was caching. It was caching the wrong results, and we weren't breaking that cache properly.
Yeah, just on the same note, I mean, I remember working on an app, and I got in and, we kind of got all the features done, so I had some time to go clean up the code. So I start cleaning up the code, and I start running some of the plugins, some of the gems that help you track down N+1 queries and stuff in your Rails. And so I go and I clean all of that stuff up, and then my client starts using the app, and it turns out that there are a couple of critical pages that are just running hecka slow, really, really slow. And, it never occurred to me to actually run a perf test on any of this stuff. And so I'm in there and I'm cleaning up N+1 queries that make it go from 10 milliseconds to 9 milliseconds or something stupid like that, and not really realizing that there's another place where, just a little bit of investment in time and effort, I'm bringing it down from loading the page in 2 seconds to loading the page in 400 milliseconds. And that's where I should have been focusing my energy. So, the moral there is, just measuring and just making sure that you're working on the right problems. And not doing the premature optimization, because it may not matter. And that I think your tale with caching just kind of brings that up too, is that, if you're eliminating N+1 queries, the side effects aren't going to be that big. But if you're mucking with caching to try and make it go faster, and it's not going to have an impact on anyone, you may have just complicated something and maybe even messed it up by putting something complex in front of something that was relatively simple and worked fine.
Yeah. And, on that same note, when you are testing out your application, if you're browser testing or whatever, populate the database with unrealistic number of records, because you'll find gaps, in your logic where things are much slower than you thought. And your application will eventually, maybe, hopefully, grow to that size where you would then experience those issues.
What tools do you use to do that? How do you populate your data with unrealistic data, your tables?
So there's one gem called Active Record Import where, I'll use a seed file. The seed file, my seed files are usually kind of large as far as how much data there is in there. And it all depends on how big the application is. So, on some of the larger ones, I will use Active Record Import to basically generate 10,000, 20,000 records, and then do a bulk import with the Active Record Import.
That's cool.
And I actually just did I'm working on another application right now, and I did, using the Faker gem to generate like fake names, fake email addresses, and stuff like that. Without using the Active Record Import, it would take maybe 15, 20 minutes to run 500,000 records, which was a insane amount of time. With Active Record Import, it took like 2.
Wow.
I've got another
That's
one.
Cool.
This reminded me of another one. And then, this one's a doozy. So I had a project that I worked on for a client, and there were like 3 or 4 different access levels for different people for the data. And the way that I managed a lot of that access, and the way that I managed what they could modify and validate the data, was with validations. And so I used Active Record validations. If you save it, if this person saves it, then validate this way. And if this person saves it, validate it that way. And oh man, the data wound up so inconsistent. It was a mess. And then what happened was, like even the ultra admin who could save anything in any form basically was still running into issues because it wouldn't display properly somewhere else because it didn't have the data it needed. Or, then somebody else would go in and try and, process a refund or something like that. And even though the refund logic wasn't tied up in that particular validation, there was something in the address or something else that, that they didn't have the permission to override. And so the refund couldn't be processed because the data wasn't in. Anyway, it was... So make sure your validations are consistent for everybody. And then, just manage things upward from there as far as your permissions and anything else. And by no means allow anybody to just have blanket access to create or modify data without passing all of the validations and meeting all the expectations in your app.
Yeah. I could just see that support call go right now. Like, yeah, how can I help you? Like, where's my refund? You guys said you're going to give me a refund. Like, I'm showing it's here. I'm showing that we gave you a refund.
I've talked to 4 people, and they all said they were refunding it. Yep. Yeah, that was my life for a week. Boy, does that get stressful.
Yeah. Yeah, but we went into R&D so we didn't have to talk to people, right?
That's right. Alrighty, well, should we do some picks?
Yeah, let's do it.
This episode is sponsored by Hired.com. Are you searching for a new job? That can be stressful, scary, and time-consuming. Pushy recruiters try to sell you on roles you don't actually want, and the job boards make you feel like you're throwing your resume into a black hole, never to be seen again. And sometimes you go all the way through the interview process just to find out at the very end that the salary, offer, or company culture doesn't match what you're looking for. Hired is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for full-time and contract opportunities in engineering, development, design, product management, data science, sales, and marketing. We make your job search faster, focused, and stress-free. Instead of endlessly applying to companies and hoping for the best, Hired puts you in control of when and how you connect with compelling new opportunities. After completing one simple application, top employers apply to hire you, and on Hired you receive personal interview requests and upfront salary information so you can make informed decisions about what opportunities to pursue over a condensed timeline. Hired offers access to more than 4,000 innovative employers, including big brand names like Facebook and smaller emerging startups. The size and type of company you want to connect with is totally up to you. And we help you find new opportunities in 17 major cities in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Open to relocation? Let them know. Your privacy and autonomy in your job search is of utmost importance. And if you sign up today using the show's link, that's hired.com/rubyrogues, you can get double the normal hiring bonus. That's $600 instead of $300. So go check them out at hired.com/rubyrogues.
All right, Dave, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, so, I think I'm going to just choose the picks that we kind of talked about on the show. One is Gem in a Box, which is a basically self-hosted proxy that will download and store on your local environment or your local servers any kind of gem files that you're using within your application. So it's as simple as just running the Gem in a Box server on a spare computer that you have, and then just pointing your application to this the sources within your gem file to this Gem in a Box server. So it's very handy, and it can definitely protect you from like those kind of left pad incidences where someone rage quits or yanks a gem. And then the other is active record import. So it saves me a lot of time when I'm seeding files or doing any kind of importing data, to where I can build and construct the data first and then do a bulk import. Saves a lot of time.
Awesome. Eric, what are your picks?
I was muted. I'm sorry, guys.
It's okay, it happens.
I got to repeat myself. All right. No. So.
now this episode isn't very dry.
Oh, well.
Wah, wah.
I had to get a dad joke in somewhere. Sorry.
There you go. Two picks. The first one is Udemy. I'm a huge Udemy fan. I've been a fan of theirs for a long time. Udemy has some amazing courses, but I want to point out one specific instructor over there named Stephen Greider. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. This person is like the Bob Ross of programming. He makes it look simple. He helps you walk through, and he's like such a great teacher. And he has courses on React, on Elixir, and on all sorts of Redux and stuff like that. And if you're into any of that stuff or want to get into it and maybe aren't ready to hop into a boot camp or something like that, I highly recommend Stephen Greider's courses on Udemy, and you can typically get them for $10. It's worth every penny and more. And my second one is Code Sponsor, which is my company that I'm trying to, the whole purpose of Code Sponsor is to help connect sponsors with open source developers. So if you have an open source project, if you want help getting funding for it, if you don't know how to go about doing that, that's what we do. We are trying to help sustain open source by connecting sponsors with software developers and software open source projects. Codesponsor.io.
Awesome. I am completely drawing a blank. I'm going to just pick Audible. I tend to listen to books on my run and in the morning. In fact, I'll go ahead and pick another thing that I use every day as well. But I've really been enjoying Audible. That's where I've been listening to the books that I picked on the last show. And the other pick that I have is a meditation app. In fact, if you follow me on Twitter or something, you might have seen me tweet about it, because I do a meditation practice every morning. Except for this morning, because I completely slept through my alarm. I woke up like 2 hours after I was supposed to, and I was like, oh.
You were just in a deep meditation, right?
That's right.
That was the extra deep meditation.
And then the last thing is yesterday, I'll just admit it. So yesterday, I've never had a panic attack before until yesterday. And it at least I think it was a panic attack from what I've heard from other people. But I was so distraught that I actually couldn't breathe, and just completely. Anyway, but just taking a second to calm down. In my case, I said a prayer, but just taking a minute to kind of get some peace and just just recenter a lot of times is something that's really important. And I don't know that everybody has, I know everybody doesn't have the same, spiritual or mental practice to do that, but I just can't recommend highly enough that you find something like that to kind of help you figure that stuff out. And it turned out that, the stuff I was freaking out about wasn't that big a deal, but it felt like it at the moment. And, like I said, it was my first time, and people who have that kind of anxiety on a regular basis, I feel really, I can sympathize with them a little bit. And I feel, bad for them. But yeah, I mean, just finding that, and for me, it's rooted a lot in spirituality and the way I practice religion. But, other people find it different ways. And I just can't recommend to people highly enough, go out there and just find that thing that kind of centers your life or gives you something to hold on to when things are going to get hard. Because I haven't met anyone yet that didn't have things get hard at some point. So anyway, I'm just going to throw that out there.
Well said.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. Thanks you both for coming and sharing your horror stories. That was kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, good talk.
You got to start the intro music this time with like the old scary sounds, the Halloween sounds.
That'd be awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to encourage everyone to go check out Ruby Dev Summit. It's free to attend live, and then if you want the recordings and stuff, you can pay for that. But rubydevsummit.com, and then just scroll down and click the sign up button. And we'll catch everyone next week.
All right. Talk to you later.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.